This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.
Coming up in just a minute is a conversation with Bob Kunz from Highland Park Brewing, but first, we'd like to thank the sponsors for this episode, starting with G&D Chillers. As the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and dedication to their customers' craft. For 25 years, G&D has led the way on custom, innovative solutions that match brewing customers' immediate and future needs. Whether it's a simple relocation of the utility connections for a complex build-up or ground-level design and engineering, G&D is ready to meet the challenge and think outside the box. Contact G&D Chillers today for your chiller sizing needs at 1-800-555-0973 or reach out online at gdchillers.com. Also, craft the perfect pour with superior fruit from the perfect puree. Picked at the peak of ripeness, the fruit is pureed and packed for optimal fresh flavor and color. But don't just take their word for it. Experience flavor firsthand by curating your own complimentary sample box at perfectpuree.com/beer. That's perfect, PUREE.com/beer. Samples are complimentary for brewing professionals only. And now, time for some conversation and beers. Hey everybody, it's John Hall, the senior editor of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, and I'm in Los Angeles at the relatively newly opened second location for Highland Park Brewing Company. And sitting across from me is the brewer, founder, general creative thought, Bob Kunz.
Hello.
Thanks for doing this.
My pleasure.
Did I get your name right?
You got it right.
All right.
Bob Kunz.
There it is. I have to practice these things as I'm doing them. So tell me a little bit about this location that we're in right now.
So we are in Chinatown, which is essentially in downtown Los Angeles or adjacent to downtown Los Angeles. This specific location where we are is pretty awesome. We're kind of on the outskirts of Chinatown and in an area that the city of LA was kind of trying to redevelop. So we actually signed our lease and kind of got started on this project before there was anything. And now sitting in our tasting room, you can look out and see that we're kind of frontage to a massive state park.
Yeah.
And there is the train whizzing by, stopping a block from here. But yeah, we're kind of in the heart of LA. We're in an industrial zone, but we're on a park, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And the area in general, it's zoned to allow for residential, commercial, and industrial. So for us, that's awesome. It means we can brew beer, we can sell beer direct to consumer, and there's going to be people living within the vicinity of us that will treat us like their local watering hole.
And so it's cool to be in now before a lot of that happens as well. You can kind of get a feel for the place and then be that first welcoming spot when people come in.
We've already felt it. I mean, it's actually funny getting to the monetary side of things.
Yeah.
We signed our lease, the front portion of our space, which is 6,000 square feet. And a year later, when we started construction, we realized we needed more space. And the rent had doubled in that year time. And it had doubled because we're an anchor tenant here for a new developing area. So it's like we caused ourselves to have to pay more rent.
But this being the second location, though, and I visited your first location just the other day, radically different, like two very different vibes, places. The beer is great, but I walked in here and it's not at all what your first place is like.
Well, I will say, just it's in opening a brewery, it had been a long time pursuit, and I moved to Highland Park in 2010. And Highland Park didn't have a whole lot of craft beer, and the guys, there are three gentlemen who opened up the Hermosillo. So they opened up the Hermosillo in, I think, 2011. And so that is actually a fully separate company.
Okay.
So that was an existing bar, and just a rad little neighborhood kind of dive bar, but focused on quality product and kind of a comfortable like cantina vibe or something. But I loved bellying up to the bar. I became friends with the owners of the Hermosillo, and they basically said, we know you're trying to open up a brewery. Maybe you could do it under the same roof. We have 500 square feet behind our bar that we're not using, and kind of set out from there. So
it was you putting your brewery into an existing space. And so, well, I guess when it came sort of time to come here, like this is your fully executed vision of what
yes
you want for it. And what I'm sort of struck in, and I've had your beers before, and experimental, and you do a lot of the the mixed culture fermentation stuff, but also a lot of great pilsners, lagers, and this kind of feels like your beer in a lot of ways. This tap room, and I'm seeing that sort of more and more. But I wonder if that like how much does the beer play into what you wanted the aesthetics of this place to be?
I mean, that's an interesting thing. I think sometimes like life has a way of like taking form based on like who you are and what you sort of stand for. Or
yeah.
Like, so I don't think it's as intentional that like, okay, this is what the beer is, this is what the space is going to be. And it might just be more a natural extension of, I mean, I've been pursuing beer my entire life. And, thinking about places, where would I want to drink beer? What does this like feel like? Am I comfortable? Do I want to have another pint? And then, I mean, with the beer itself, that's an extension of me. And so I think it's maybe not as calculated, but just a natural like path that the space and beer has taken. And the people that I've been surrounded by. I mean, the guys who did the design and layout of this are really good friends of mine. I've known them for, 10 years. And I think it's that it took us a while to see what that vision was, but we came to this place that, we kind of not being super clear here, but
no, but
I think it is an interesting observation, and it's something that I was actually just thinking about this week of how important I think it is for beer. And this is kind of zooming back a little bit and looking at a bigger vision. But beer to me is like it's so important that we have good culture and that we're forward thinking and that we're thinking about innovation and we're thinking about ways that we are informed outside of beer to better our beer experience, better our beer. So to me, it's like I don't just drink beer. I'm huge into wine, spirits, anything that's out there that I can get my hands on, I'm trying to experience. So kind of blabbering on here, but I think that it's a point that's important for me is that we're informed by the world around us and that we're exploring the world around us and then taking that back to the experience of what is the drinking experience in our bar? What is the beers we're putting on the wall? How are they some sort of unique expression that's, both informed by things of the past and pushing forward to like what the future holds and what it's going to evolve into and creating experiences that challenge people to that next path and creating experiences that make them comfortable, that they're willing to take those little leaps into, something that's out of their comfort zone or whatever.
Is there an example of a beer that you've done recently that was born out of one of these experiences?
Funny enough, we just did for all of our full-time employees, we went camping on Sunday night, so 2 nights ago. And we have a beer that's currently in barrels. It's like a barrel fermented Saison. I really loved some like Terrace Bulba from Brasserie de la Seine, or the table beer from the Colonel. And they're these beers that are like low ABV and have these like massive, broad, like tannic bitterness. And for whatever reason, I've been like thinking about alpine ingredients in beer a lot recently. But we were camping, and the campsite that we were at had all these pine trees with these massive pine cones that are like 3, 4, 5 pounds each.
Really?
Like some of them were as much as like
Sounds
10,
like mutants.
10 to
Like-
12 inches long. So we made this barrel.
I don't get out into nature much, but that sounds like frightening, actually.
They're huge.
Yeah.
They're huge. So we
Could knock you out if they hit you on the head, yeah.
So yeah, we're Sunday night, 2 nights ago we were camping and we had this beer, this like kind of, tannic, bitter, barrel fermented saison, mixed culture saison, and I've been thinking I want to find the right ingredient for that. And we're like, these pine cones are it.
It's like
Right.
mutant, just it falls and hits you, and there it is.
Yeah, and it's like, we're smelling it, and they have all this like cool sap coming out, and the sap is just so aromatic. But if we're not out there like camping in Angel's Crest Forest, which is, a huge part of Los Angeles, then we couldn't take that sort of information experience and bring it back to our beer. So yeah, that's a perfect example, I think.
How are you going to plan on using those in the beer? You're going to age them? Are you going to give them a soak in Everclear or something and kill some of the bugs, or do you want some of the bugs? Like,
you know what? We with our mixed culture beers, we kind of let them take the path that's like on that ingredient. So we'll probably rinse them off, and we'll probably put them in a tank, purge that tank, rack the barrels into the tank, and treat it like a dry hop. So we'll have it on pine cones for a week or something like that, and we'll taste to see what it's drawing out.
Okay.
Of the pine cones.
Going to throw them in whole? You're going to give them a chop? Like, what's your?
I think throw them in whole.
Okay.
I think throw them in whole. Yeah.
That's kind of fun. All right, we're going to take a quick break. Great beers are made from select ingredients. With BSG, you'll bring the world to your brewhouse with an unparalleled and diverse selection of ingredients from across the globe to just down the road. Their dedicated customer service team and industry experience provides you with the assistance you need every step of the way. Let BSG be your supplier of choice for products essential to making great artisanal beverages so you can stay focused on your craft. For more information, visit them at bsgcraftbrewing.com or contact them at 1-800-374-2739. We'd also like to thank the American Homebrewers Association, a community of homebrewers and an essential source for brewing tips, recipe, and homebrewing culture. They're great supporters of this magazine and podcast, and if you're not already a member, you can join at homebrewersassociation.org. So you talk about mixed cultures as well, and what do you guys call it? Zauza?
Yeah, Yowza.
Yowza.
Yeah, we.
How'd that start?
Well, I've been into beer since about 2001, and immediately upon getting into beer, I just had an adventurous palate, wanted to try anything and everything I could, and the sort of like sour beers of the world are kind of the epitome of complexity.
Yeah.
So I immediately was homebrewing, trying to figure out ways to make these sour beers, and probably starting in about 2006, 2007, I essentially started a mother culture. So I had a corny keg, a soda pop keg, and every time I would have a good batch, whether it be from spontaneous or bottle dregs or lab pitches, essentially those dregs would go into this corny keg, and that just morphed over time. The Yowza that you speak of is still in that same corny keg, and that corny keg has actually never been cleaned out. We just basically prop it up inside of the keg every time we're going to use it. So it's an amalgamation of a lot of things, essentially over the past 10 years of brewing for both me as a home brewer and us here commercially as a commercial brewer.
For folks who wanted to try to do something like this, how do you recommend they go about it, and then even just maintain it? I mean, you've had this now for, 12 years?
Yeah. It's a funny approach, but honestly, Brett, to me, performs a lot better under stress. So we have gotten lab pitches, and we'll treat them like we would our clean beers, like something we'd brew an IPA or lager with. And I have never liked the results, ever. There's something to the stress on those cultures that really provide some of the coolest character and kind of touch on this fringe of sort of like funk and must and fruit and all of that. So my like approach would be to essentially not do a starter, not overpitch, maybe we actually store those cultures at ambient, and it's kind of a survival of the fittest. It's like the hardiest have adapted over time, and that's what's probably still living and breathing. The ones that can take that stress, and they tend to also provide the coolest character. So if I was a home brewer and I wanted to say like, all right, I'm going to start up my own house culture, I probably would get a couple bottles of goose. I would drink those bottles of goose and leave all of the set like an inch of sediment on the bottom of those bottles. And then I would propagate that. I would, brew a 1 gallon batch of beer, pitch that, inch of dregs from that goose into that keg or into that carboy or whatever, and go from there. I think that those bottle dregs are kind of the epitome of what I'm saying, in that they've already been through a full fermentation. They're in the bottom of a bottle and they don't have food and they don't have oxygen, so they're stressed. And the ones that survived are probably going to be hardy, and they're probably going to provide some pretty cool character. Probably need to do a little bit of research on what goose producers, are like keeping their spontaneous cultures in the bottom of their bottle versus maybe some of them, repitch with something else or whatnot. So, and then once you get started, you just keep saving the sediment. We do it under pressure in a corny keg, and that seems to be the best path, and we have the best results. Otherwise, I would probably, that's my best path.
Okay. And then it just seems like you're living it at ambient as well, which I find kind of interesting. So what are some of the dominant flavors and aromas that you're getting off of your strain now?
Our flavor and aroma-wise, I think ours is very stone fruit driven. I mean, we always get big peach, nectarine, apricot. I think we get this nice kind of like mustiness, like wet wood, maybe a little bit of like sulfur in there as well. Our cultures have a huge lactic acid bacteria component. So, ours can pick up a lot of acidity if we don't add enough bitterness. So I think that's a big component and is shaping where our cultures are evolving, because I think we're continually trying to fight back that like high acid. Like I don't want single note acid beers. So we're kind of constantly adding more bitterness to restrain the acidity and to get a more complex finished product rather than just an acidic finished product.
A lot of the beers that are out there, or I guess a good amount, and some of the folks who are making them, it is this one note acidic. I'm seeing that sort of more and more, and it's it's our sour program, it's supposed to be that way. And it's like, well, not necessarily, and it's certainly not supposed to be an acid program, as it were as well. Where does balance, where does complexity, where does nuance, and not just being one note, where do you see the importance in that?
I think drinkability. I mean, it's like I always joke, but it's like I don't want to just make festival beers, which festival beers, you're just trying to get the biggest impact. It's fast, so that people go, oh shit, that was it. And then they get the bottle and they go home and they're like, wow, I can't even share this bottle with one other person. It's too much.
Right.
So
it's too abrasive.
Yeah.
It's too, yeah.
So, I think we're still trying to find our way in it, honestly. I mean, like I said, our cultures do have a lot of lactic acid bacteria, so we're fighting that acid very regularly. But to me, in my palate, it feels like it's a more sustainable beer, one that is more drinkable. I think, like, texturally, I'm a real, like, textural drinker, so I'm thinking about acid and bitterness and body and all of these things together. And I think the most drinkable and the ones that I want to return to kind of have this like tannic fruit skin quality to them, where they're not like, we actually have 2 beers on our wall right now, Orange Pet Cat and Lingua Franca Fruta. And both of those beers, you could probably even get away with, they're not even sour beer. They're kind of going into this like blended mixed culture beer where they do have acidity as a component, but it's not knocking you over the head with it. And it is more drinkable. You can get a 9-ounce pour and enjoy that whole glass instead of working your way through it because the acid is, So yeah, I think it is that. It's trying to get to a place of like actually being able to drink a full glass of what's in front of you.
And with so much, and before we started recording, you were saying that you want to sell everything out of your tap room here, and so you want people to come and actually stay and have full glasses, and you want to have. I guess that's where drinkability comes in a strong way as well, right? If you were a brewery where all you could do is come in and maybe have one, and then your palate is wrecked, or you just sort of like lost the taste for it, like that's not going to. It's just not a sustainable business model either.
Yeah,
right.
I agree. I think, I think sour beer is in. It's kind of in a cultural like point in time that no one can really get a handle on. Every brewery that I've come into contact in recent history that's making sour beer is kind of saying, we don't even know where to go in this because the sales on them have dropped so much.
Yeah.
So one, I think more people are producing them than ever, and people went all in. I mean, I just did a tour of the new Russian River facility in Windsor, and the whole tour leads you to this like altar of the cool ship. And you walk through, the very end is like a barrel warehouse, and then it's like a church door, and you open the church door. And on our tour, Vinny was kind of like, yeah, we kind of planned this before sour beer sales dropped off. And now we're here, and we're excited about it, but we're selling less mixed culture beer than ever. And forever, I mean, Russian River is the epitome of like that. They're like held up in the highest esteem, and they're still making these incredible beers, but they're just, seeing that drop off. And I think, not to go off on such a tangent, but, there's bigger producers like the brewery and Rare Barrel that have committed thousands and thousands of barrels of sour beer sour beer. And I just don't think that people's palates can sustain that much acid. So, for us,
it's sustainably. Like a bottle now and again isn't going to, Yeah. But especially even as I realize as I'm getting older as a drinker as well, like it is, I'm starting to get heartburn now. Like I'm starting to get some of these, and there's some that'll really kind of, like knock you on your ass because of it. Not alcohol wise, but just. Like it beats you up. It's like those TV commercials where the food starts attacking you. I feel like we need some bottles going and beating folks up. To your point, even on sales dropping or it being unknown, Two Roads out in Connecticut they're just about to open up their Area 2, which is going to be a full sour production facility. And I was talking to them for an article that's in our Brewing Industry Guide a couple of months ago, and they're saying, we have no idea. Like there's no real good sales data that says that this is a smart thing or it's not a smart thing. And we're sort of taking a gamble that like we hope it is, but it might not be. Like there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to sales, especially of that. So I guess on the beers then that you're making, though, you also have the clean program.
Yes. I mean, I think that, you were kind of touching on a point, and I went off on a tangent. Okay. Just the idea of like us selling direct to consumer. Yeah, right. And the culture of that and how important that is. I mean, I always want to return to this topic because I think it's the heart of what we are as a company. It's like, it is, to me, it is a win across the board in that as a business, you have better margins, so we can actually survive in an incredibly competitive marketplace. The consumers get to interact directly with the producer, which is like awesome, that is such a great thing. And then just like freshness and quality of beer. It doesn't get, the supply chain doesn't get muddied up by distributors that don't know anything about your beer, or, retailers that don't care about it as much as you care about it. So it is the model that makes sense. And then, that I think leads us to, us wanting to make beers that make sense in that model. So, I probably drink more lager beer than I do of anything else. I'm, very passionate about making lager beer and contributing to lager beer as a whole. I think that I think about like geography and how that affects drinking, and I hope that we're making beers that fit our geography. And to me, Southern California it's hot and sunshine, and you should be drinking things that are, crisp, snappy, bitter, have a little tinge of acidity, these things that like refresh you essentially. And so, the areas of beer that we put the most amount of attention into is like, lager beer, and that's like pilsners and Helles and then hoppy beer. And even the hoppy beer where we introduce lager and hoppy into the same category. I think we're, really like putting a lot of time and effort into making these kind of like new school lagers. Mm-hmm. And then we make IPA, which I think is appropriate for our climate. I mean, it's appropriate in craft beer in general.
I was going to say,
consumers want, but I still think it's appropriate. And then the mixed culture beer, I think, is appropriate. So it's, we're making beers that both we're passionate about and that hopefully are appropriate for the geography that we live in. And then we're also making them that, people can belly up and sell lager or drink lager. I think that we are like beer geeks at heart, so we're making beer geeky beer, but we're so committed to lager beer, and our consumers have fully bought in. I mean, we're constantly have 5, 6, 7 lagers on our board at any given time, and we have no problem selling those. No problem at all. So,
where are you exploring with lagers these days? Like, where are the touch points to, where you're trying to, figure out like what's next, or is it just trying to refine classics? Like, what's your approach like when you're trying to create a new lager recipe, I guess is the best way of phrasing that.
Kind of multifaceted. It's interesting because sometimes like we try to touch on and innovate and move sort of like beer forward, kind of going back to that like evolution of things and evolving and like looking forward. Like one of the things I've been most excited about is we've been doing these like barrel fermented pilsners. So, I will say though, I have loved them. And they don't sell at all. And so it's like sometimes you touch on these worlds that are like really cool and they're unique, and maybe it's just not quite there yet. And we're still going to continue to do that, but we're not going to focus on those beers. I think one thing that has been kind of eye-opening in recent history as we've been trying to just get closer to the raw ingredients, like more intentional with the hops that we're using, and trying to get as close to like actually doing selection and working with farmers and that sort of thing. And with German hops and the lots that we're getting, we've just seen huge disparity of quality, at least quality of what we're looking for. So it's like we really like for more traditional pilsners to use like noble hops like Tettnang, Hallertau. Saphir is probably one of our favorites. But when we're using those hops, we're seeing these massive disparity. It's like we'll get a lot of Saphir, and Saphir is probably my favorite German hop.
What do you like about
it? When it is good Saphir, which means it was probably picked at the right time and processed properly, it's got this great floral, citrus. We named one of our beers Pleasant Pills, and I think that name came from us describing Saphir. It just kind of has this like pleasantness to it as a whole. But floral and citrus, I think, kind of like drive that hop.
So when you get a good lot of it, yeah.
Yeah, so I think ingredient selection is like a huge kind of eye-opening experience in recent history, and we haven't even gotten to a place where you can go and do like German hop selection, but I think that will help dictate the quality of our beer and the consistency of our lager program moving forward.
But having that access, though, I guess, and the larger you are as a brewery, the better access you have to some better ingredients as well. And so like when you're fairly small, like at your old place or your original place, I guess I should say, like you guys weren't necessarily, first on a lot of people's lists when ingredient wise. But then when you start making more beer, obviously you can get to that point, and then it also comes with time as well, right? And forging those relationships.
Yes. I mean, you're touching on a hot button for me.
Okay.
In that, as a small little brewery in a 500 square foot space, we were making 800 or 900 barrels a year, and the intent was to really kind of know our raw ingredients and know where our ingredients are coming from. And I'll tell you what, it's next to impossible as a small brewer in that size to get inroads to be working with these, brokers or growers. And it was incredibly frustrating to me. I mean, it pissed me off that I'm spending $40,000 a year on hops, and I can't even have any say in what I'm getting or how I get it or these things. And, as a small producer, it's $40,000 is a lot of to spend in a year on one ingredient.
Yeah.
But that's small potatoes. So it's a really fascinating political game. And, in this past year, I think we are getting on people's radar more. We're making a little bit more beer, and we're seeing more attention, essentially, and people willing to work with us. And, I don't want to dwell on just the bad, because now I feel very grateful and fortunate that we are making those inroads and, being able to, talk to farmers and to select the actual hops that we're going to be using. But I think for a lot of other small producers out there that are still in that same position, it's I hope that culture can shift for people that want to be intentional. Mm-hmm. It's if people want to go out of their way to interact with their raw ingredients, I would hope that there's a road to that instead of just this huge machine of you order your grain from this spreadsheet of grain suppliers, and you order your hops from this spreadsheet, and they arrive, and that's what it is. And it's that's kind of stupid to me.
Yeah.
It's my life's dedicated to beer. We should be able to pursue just relationships, and it takes a lot of time and effort. I'll say that to sort of forge those relationships. And
we started talking about it, and then we jumped around in a fun way. But one of the other business things that comes up is self-distribution, or not necessarily getting into. I think earlier you called it the rat race of the three tiers. You decided not to do that, right? You want to sell everything direct to consumer.
I would say I'm a staunch self-distributor. I think that any small producer that gives up their distribution rights is giving up a big component of who and what they can be. To me, it's if I'm saying that I want to sell beer direct to consumer over my bar, then I want to be able to have that same extension if we do sell some draft out, to sell it direct to the bars that I think are going to care for it, and that we'll treat it properly. So you sign up with a distributor and it feels I got my signing bonus or whatever it is. But if you're in it for the long run, that doesn't matter. What should matter is sort of the relationships that you're building with those retailers. We know every single person that we sell beer to and have a relationship, and they represent it, and they're representing us out at their tap room. Right. Essentially, that's how I feel.
Right.
So, as a small producer producing, we'll probably produce 2,000 barrels between our two spots this year. Like, there is not a hair on my body that would even consider like going through a distributor. I think there's just too much lost. It's like you get lost in someone's portfolio, and then the person at the bar is doing the same thing that I was just saying. They're just ordering your beer off of some spreadsheet, and maybe because like they don't recognize it, they don't order it, and then the beer's not fresh, and there's a disconnect there. We are small businesses, so we need to make money. You lose on margins.
Sure.
You lose 30, 40% on margins. And, I know that is a privileged position that I'm coming from, because we are selling all of our beer, and it is, we've positioned ourselves and we've been able to just sell all of our beer immediately, and other people aren't in that position.
Sure.
So that's probably why they sign up with a distributor. But I think that they're kind of going down a path where it's like they have too much beer, so they're like, we got to sell all this beer, and then they get it into a distributor, and it fulfills an immediate need that we have too much beer, but that beer is essentially, they're not gaining momentum by getting it out of their cold box and into the distributor's cold box, and then that's not going to like build momentum unless they can support that beer out on the marketplace.
Right.
And I'll tell you what, most small producers don't have bodies out there to build relationships with the retailers where all of their beer is going. So I know I'm kind of rambling here.
No. But I like the idea though of the momentum though, because you're right. Signing on doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to keep kicking the can down the road. But from your situation, how do you keep the momentum going?
Honestly, I think producing within your means. It's like we have the ability to make more beer than we currently do. And that doesn't mean we should make more beer. Like, it's the type of thing where my goal is not to like make as much beer and get it out there. It is to have good quality fresh beer, and for us to sell it direct to consumer or direct to retailer. And so, it's managing your inventories so that you like stay on a good path. Our goal is pretty much, hoppy beer should be drank within 3 weeks of us like kegging it off. And we try to get it, if we're selling a keg of beer out to a bar, we try to get it out within 2 days of us kegging it off. And that then sets the tone that people are experiencing our beer fresh, which is a competitive advantage as a small producer. It's something that we can do, is control our supply chain in that regard. So, I think it's having some self-control in what you're producing, so that you actually like do it based on demand rather than just purely like, well, we got 10 fermenters, we might as well fill them all up and like,
But there's a certain amount of mindfulness that comes with your approach that I think with beer and this beer industry, it's been go, fast, and then sometimes people stop and they look around and they say, "My God, how did I get here?" But it almost sounds like from your approach, like you're aware of it every step of the way, and that I think in a lot of ways that's sort of like your beers as well. Like it kind of comes back to the overall recipes that you guys are making, where they are very deliberate, where they are very thoughtful. There's creativity behind them, but like you sort of wait for the inspiration to strike as opposed to just start throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're touching on something that is like the idea of having self-control. It's really hard. I say it from a first-hand perspective. It's like, we went from that 500 square foot space to this now 9,000 square foot space, and as you're building it out, it's always like, well, we're here. We might as well like go a little bigger. We might as well make a little more. It's like we're already like going down that path, and I feel like the business kind of starts to take a momentum of itself, not just us driving the momentum. It's like, okay, now there's 30 employees, and all these employees are kind of like things just start kind of snowballing forward, and it's really hard to sort of like say, no, we're gonna pause. All right, we're not gonna brew more beer. Like, which sounds stupid. Like, it sounds like that would just naturally happen, but something about like the efficient. It's like I like efficiency a lot as well, in addition to these things, and that my mind for wanting things to be efficient also makes you want to kind of like maximize your capacity. And it's like, well, we have empty oak barrels, we might as well fill the empty oak barrels. And it's like, well, maybe that's not the best path for our business. Maybe we should just sit on these barrels for a little bit because we already have too much mixed culture stuff sort of in the works, and so on and so forth. So self-control is a hard thing as a human being.
Yeah,
and it doesn't, I think when you have a company that is like, growing and has potential to growth, it's like, we got a good brand and people want our beer. Then it's like, well, why shouldn't we just be making more? Or like, but I think that it's important to have that restraint and to not just keep with that snowball.
And it also sort of, safeguards you for whatever could potentially happen in the industry going forward.
Yes. I mean, I think that there's so many breweries out there right now. It is so competitive. And even in LA, you would think like, okay, there's 12 million or 13 million people and there's only 70 breweries. And of those 70 breweries, maybe like nobody's making over 15,000 barrels. And maybe only like 5 breweries are making more than 5,000 barrels. So the volume of like independent breweries brewing beer in LA is not very much at all. But you want to know what? It still feels really competitive here. It is like, it's hard, And so I think that I think that we're at a point in time with beer. I mean, we've seen in the past month or two, some awesome breweries in San Diego close. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of been a real gut check. 2 of them, Council and Toolbox, were ones that opened right at the time that we opened. And for me, it was kind of like, oh, shit. Like, we're right in that same window of time that they are. And I regarded their beers well. So it is a challenge. It is a challenge.
Do you have a hope for beer?
Yeah. A hope for beer. It's probably a big, convoluted answer here, but my hope would be that more breweries would stay within their means. That it's like, I think that they become these really growing growth businesses, and it's hard to like stop that or to slow it down. But I think that like consumers will have better experiences if there's more like local producers that are thoughtful, that want to just sell beer to their local market. And I think you can succeed, and I think you can make money this way.
Sure.
It's not just a
nice living too.
It's like I'm not like being blind to the fact that I'm running a business, and that it's like, I want to provide for my family and whatever. But I think that that's the model that's going to probably succeed moving forward, because I think consumers are getting more savvy to freshness. And, there's a lot of not fresh beer out on grocery store shelves. And so my hope is just that people, I guess, that there's breweries that stay within their means and don't grow too much.
I think that's a good place to leave it. Bob Kunz of Highland Park Brewing Company. Thanks for having me here in your brand new tap room. I encourage anybody who's coming into LA, even just for an afternoon, that this is the place to go. While away a little bit of time, go through the tap lists. It's a really cool space. So thanks for having us here today.
Well, it's my honor to be on. I appreciate it.
And you, listener, if you have questions for me, guests you'd like to hear, topics you'd like addressed, you can reach out to me directly at John Holl. It's JOHNHOLL at beerandbrewing.com, or you can join the conversation on Twitter at John_Holl. And you should also go to beerandbrewing.com. There you can subscribe to the magazine. Please, please, please subscribe to the magazine. But you can also find great content, homebrew recipes, things about our craft beer scene, and insight from brewers like Bob. And we'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Thanks so much. Cheers. Thanks so much to this episode's sponsors. G&D Chiller is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. Join the community of homebrewers at the American Homebrewers Association. Bring the world to your brewhouse with select ingredients from BSG and craft the perfect pour with superior fruit from the perfect puree.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.